listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. This podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are cheating on their partners make decisions about how to move forward that are truly right for them. On this show, we feature tools and guidance from my coaching practice, as well as advice from other professionals whose work pertains to the sometimes complicated business of romantic relations. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Adam Kol, who is a couples financials coach. He helps couples who love each other make sure that the money conversation doesn't get in the way of having a great relationship. His coaching helps couples find financial clarity, peace of mind, stability, and partnership. Adam draws on over a decade of experience as a certified mediator and a former tax attorney and financial advisor. He received his law degree from Duke and a master's in tax law from New York University. Adam is an experienced social justice community organizer, as well as a lifelong musician. You can find his personal finance parodies on YouTube. To find them, search for Adam Kol Couples Financial Coach. Find him there. To learn more about Adam and the services he provides, go to adamkol.com, and Kol is spelled K-O-L. So that's ADAMKOL.com. Before we get to today's conversation, let me tell you that this episode is brought to you by me, Marie Murphy, PhD, relationship coaching. I provide shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental relationship coaching. You can talk to me about all the things that seem too messy or weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or your spouse or even your therapist, including but not limited to matters related to infidelity. To learn more about my coaching practice or to schedule an introductory coaching session, go to mariemurphyphd.com. Hi, Adam. It's great to have you here today.
Hi, Marie. Thanks for having me. It's great to be a part of the conversation.
Awesome. So eventually today we're going to talk about financial infidelity. But before that, let's just talk about money and why it's so important to communicate about money with our romantic partner or our life partner, and also so extremely difficult at times to talk about money. So why is it so difficult?
It's a great question. So first of all, two reasons that it's really important. Number one is that money touches all aspects of our lives, right? We're earning or spending money constantly in society. The second reason that it's so important is, unfortunately, finances are one of the top causes of stress, arguments, and even divorce. So at a population level, we can see this is a challenging issue, right? And of course, none of us want to become that statistic. Now, why is it so difficult? Well, money is a complex thing for so many of us. We grew up receiving all kinds of different messages around money. We've internalized our experiences and have different mindsets about money. And of course, our partner, being a unique individual, has their own experiences, perspectives, mindsets as well. And unfortunately, it's a taboo topic in society. So oftentimes, we don't even know how to manage our own mindsets around money, even if we actually know how to manage our money itself, which, again, this is something many of us don't learn, the practical and tactical side of money, let alone the emotional side of money. And then you put us together with another partner who's in the same boat, and we're trying to combine finances. How am I going to combine my finances with you if I'm not even sure what's going on with my own finances? How are we going to do this thoughtfully? If I don't even understand my own money mindset, how am I going to create a shared vision with you who maybe also doesn't understand your money mindset, right? So what happens as an individual is challenging. What happens as a couple is exponentially more difficult.
Sure. For sure. And I'm sure you see more of this than I do, but there are just so many layers of meaning that are really prevalent in our capitalist society around what money is and what it have it or to not have it, how much of it you spend, how much of it you save, et cetera, that are just ubiquitous. But at the same time, we don't necessarily engage with on a critical level.
Right. And it's not that any of the messages you're receiving are good or bad. At least that's not the perspective I come from. The question is, to what degree are they serving you in creating the life, the finances, the relationship that you want? If they're serving you, awesome. If they're not serving you, okay, awareness is the first step to shifting the conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that those statements kind of encapsulate so many different things. It's not a problem if it's not a problem. But if you're suffering, if there's a situation that you want to change, you have to be willing to acknowledge what is before you can.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the biggest areas of challenge or conflict couples experiencing around money?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with one area that is not a conflict, more a challenge, is that neither person may really feel enough confidence to know where to even get started, creating some sort of shared vision and concrete plan. So there's just this tremendous sense of overwhelm. Like, we do enough to survive and get by as far as like managing our finances. Maybe we miss a bill from time to time, but nothing that necessarily makes us bankrupt out on the street. But nevertheless, the idea of trying to figure out, how do we buy a home? How do we plan our wedding? How do we start or expand our family? How do we figure out if I want to start a business or you want to go back to school? How do we understand that and combine it with a healthy perspective on our finances? That is really difficult for a lot of couples. They just feel overwhelmed at that prospect and don't know where to begin. Mm-hmm. And that's the main challenge that I see. As far as conflicts, they can really arise out of anything, but the most common refrain I hear is, we have different perspectives on money, or we have different values when it comes to money. And I always say, look, that's inevitably true because you are not a carbon copy of your partner. So inevitably there are going to be some differences, but it's a matter of how can we listen to and learn from each other's differences? And is that going to become a point that drives us further apart? Or can we turn it into something that actually brings us closer together and has us highlight each other's and appreciate each other's strengths?
Yeah, I love that. Can you give some specific ways that people's different values around money manifest in practice?
Sure. I'm just going to think for a second so I can come up with a good story. So some of the ways different values might manifest, the classic example that people talk about is the spender and the saver. But I actually think about it as more the person who is more spontaneous, wants to enjoy life now, or is up for taking big risks, versus the person who's more conservative financially, right? Maybe more scared of risks. And so a client comes to mind where the husband was working a pretty well-paying job. The wife had her own business, but was only kind of making part-time money from it. And he was a little bit more like, hey, everything's going to work out and I'm willing to take on risks. And he would spend significant money on coaching and self-care related things. And then he was considering taking a job that would have been more fulfilling, but earn less. And the wife was just scared about these things. She had so much anxiety. And so they had a certain amount of debt, even though they actually had a lot of available funds that they could have used to pay off that debt in a heartbeat. Mm. Just having the debt was panicky for her. Mm-hmm. And she had almost martyred herself because she refused to do anything nice for herself, right? Meanwhile, her husband was like getting the coaching he needed, getting the therapy he needed, doing the self-care he needed, considering the lower paying job that he wanted, while she was over here not having those things, right? And I remember working with her and I asked her, what are some things you'd want if you could kind of wave the magic wand and you had $1 million, right? Or you weren't worried about your finances anymore. It took multiple sessions for her to start acknowledging the things she would actually want. She had so suppressed her desires and needs. And so some of this resulted in a more tangible, clear, obvious conflict between the two of them. But some of it was also just the disconnect fueled by him not knowing what she wants, her not getting what she wants, and then maybe some resentment of that he gets what he wants, right? And then like wondering on his part, like feeling guilty or like, am I doing something wrong here by giving myself what I want? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so that those dynamics below the surface meant that it was difficult for them to connect, and then it affects the overall the connection and the intimacy in the relationship itself.
For sure. For sure. What you just said brought up two really important points that I think are related. For one thing, not everyone allows themselves to want things. Not everyone believes that it's okay to want. And when you have people in relationship with one another who have different kind of orientations to wanting things and feeling like it's okay to have the thing want, that can create such interesting areas of challenge and opportunities for growth, whether or not it's necessarily related to money.
Right. Well, it's funny you bring that up because I had a related conversation with a client the other day. And what came out of it was this sense of, you know what, for the partner who engages in more self-care and is willing to lay out more money in order to have things that they enjoy or to be generous with other people, that first of all can be a wonderful trait. And second of all, if you're the one who's the lavish spender, the odds are pretty good that you can significantly lower how much you're spending with only a small impact on your quality of life, if any, right? And then if on the other side, you're the person who is always like withholding, maybe you're anxious about finances, then, but you don't want to spend on yourself, right? Then there's a good chance there's some low-hanging fruit of things you can buy for yourself that would greatly increase your quality of life without jeopardizing your finances too significantly, right? And then each of you can really learn from each other if you can remove the blockages that get in between you two being able to talk to and relate to each other around these topics.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And the other thing that I think is related to this is, like, some of this has so little to do with the actual dollar amounts. You can feel scarcity with all kinds of money in the bank. And you can also feel abundance, or at least not really get deep into scarcity, even if you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and over leveraged to the hilt. And so, it's so fascinating to me how humans can make such different meetings out of circumstance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've seen that in my practice. I've had clients across the income spectrum that have various different relationships with money. And like I said, sometimes it's the husband has one relationship to money and the wife has another relationship to money. And there's maybe a correlation between having more money and feeling more comfortable with money, but it's by no means anything close to a strict correlation. There are tons of variations on this.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I'm not going to get too far off onto the tangent that I was thinking of going into, but I guess my question would be, to keep it focused here, is, what would you say to people about, cultivating a conscious, deliberate attitude towards money?
Yeah. I think like anything else where there's a taboo topic and we don't have a great relationship with ourselves around this topic, and is to cultivate self-awareness. Start there, right? Come to understand your point of view and your perspectives around money. Are there things from your past that you blame yourself for and can't let go of? Are there times you maybe were taken advantage of in the past that are still in your mind, even if subconsciously, that make it hard for you to trust even someone who you love so much around finances, right? Just that introspection and the humility to know we've all made mistakes around our money. Our partners have, we have. And then just really going and getting that conversation started. Most of my clients, they'll talk about money, but it's sporadic and it's not clear what their goals are in those conversations, and they're not necessarily communicating effectively if they do have those conversations, or they just stop talking about it, right? Because it's uncomfortable. Maybe they fought in the past, right? And unfortunately, that's just going to keep you stuck where you are, right? It requires new actions if you want new results.
Right. Totally. Couldn't agree more. And, one of the things that I always work with people on is, there's ever a situation in your life where you're unhappy with the current circumstance, one of the things you have to do is start to examine what you believe to be true about that circumstance. So let's say about money, like, what do you believe is true about money? And making your unconscious, or, like the assumptions that you believe are not actually assumptions, but just a neutral reflection of the truth, and scrutinizing those can be such a valuable experience.
Absolutely. And your individual beliefs about money, and then also your money beliefs as they relate to your partner.
Right.
Like, for example, I like to tell this story that I was quoted in the Wall Street Journal in, I think it was 2020. And I spent 30 minutes talking to the journalist and she pulled a single line. And after the article came out, my mom teased me that it wasn't the most professional line ever because it said, when one person is basically like not sticking to the plan, it's easy for their partner to think they're just being a jerk. Right. And it was, I literally used the word jerk in my Wall Street Journal appearance. And it was like, but you know what? It really resonated with people because we're just like, oh, he must be doing this because he doesn't care about me. She must be doing this because she's just irresponsible. And that's almost never actually the case, right? Like we each have our own, maybe we have a values disagreement, or maybe I have some trauma or difficulties I've had in the past, or things I saw growing up that determine my value set. And oftentimes my actions are being dictated by that, right? Rather than some like pristine sense of self-awareness and clarity on vision and where I'm going, right? And that's really the goal of my work is like, how can you get that clarity on where you are today and where you want to go? And how can you move in that direction, but do it in partnership and do it with the peace of mind that comes thereby, but also with the intimacy that helps you create with your partner.
Yeah, I love that. Totally. And I love the line about being a jerk. I mean, even though I've been sort of like misquoted in that way too, or not necessarily misquoted, but like reduced to the lowest common denominator of 45 minutes I spent talking with someone. But I think, not assuming that your partner has bad intent when they do something that you're not thrilled with.
Exactly. And listen, that's hard as heck, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here like from some perch, like, oh, I'm perfect. No, listen, even in my life, in my relationships, with my girlfriend, with my family, friends, whatever, I could hear something and boom, in the world of defensiveness. But the key is if you stay where you're at and don't work on it, you're going to stay where you're at and get the same outcomes over and over, those same patterns, versus if you start cultivating some self-awareness, you take some new actions, you start talking to some new people, consuming some new content, right? That is going to help you grow in that area and create a different narrative.
Totally. Yeah, I love to tell people that, our primary responsibility and our primary opportunity is to learn how to take more responsibility for ourselves. And that is not something that you just do once and then you're done. It's a practice. We have to learn how to cultivate it. And it's an ongoing thing. And we screw up all the time because for many people, our natural tendency is to blame other people or blame outside circumstances for things within our field of experience.
Push it away. Yeah. And I mean, I love that you brought that up, right? In all my programs, so with each module that I teach, I also teach a communication skill or tool. And one of those communication tools is responsibility, right? Which I define simply as acknowledging the link between your actions or inactions and the result. Right? How your significant other feels, how it affected your finances, how it impacted your children, whatever, right? Not from a place of like right or wrong. It's not about morality per se. It's just like, I did this and it led to this.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. And to just be real about that.
Right. Let's talk about what happens when we don't have great agreements with our partner about money. And by agreements, I mean mutual understandings, agreements about, spending or saving, and anything else that you think is related.
What happens when we don't have good agreements? Okay, let me say that again. I don't want to laugh. That seems like I'm trivializing. When we don't have good agreements, which, by the way, if this is you, makes you like the vast majority of couples, right? If we don't have good agreements, then unfortunately, this is a breeding ground for anxiety, fear, resentment. And I like to say resentment is the intimacy killer, right? And so it just unfortunately will put you down this path where maybe you're either overly scrutinizing every decision you're making, or you're just trying to push away any consideration. But that's really dangerous because it can impact not only your relationship with your significant other, but also impact your finances. So what I find is that having agreements is essential, but how do we get there? Unfortunately, a big mistake that most people make is they try and go straight to a specific, right? Straight to, let's decide how much money is, like, if you spend over X dollars, then you should talk to me first, right? Or we should spend X dollars per month on groceries or dining out. They try and go straight to the numbers, straight to a specific, without having a big picture agreement. Unfortunately, that's usually a recipe for arguments. And if there's any sort of existing power dynamic, one person is the fiercer arguer or more stubborn, or maybe more money or is more assertive, then they can often get their way, replicating the overall dynamic in the relationship. And the person who's the other way, more passive, or maybe makes less money or is on the downside of a power dynamic, they just kind of get strong-armed and go along with it. Right.
Can I interject for a minute?
Of course.
What you're describing is like exactly what a financial coach that my spouse and I saw once prescribed. It was like, like I thought we were going to do intake and she went right to the numbers and I was shocked. And
yes,
let's just say it didn't end up being a long-term coaching engagement. So I love that you're talking about the fact that we can't just jump straight to the numbers.
Yes. Well, here's the thing, right? You can, but it's likely to end with more heartache and more resentment, more strife. And any plan you come up with is way less likely to stick, right? So what I do with my clients, what I recommend to everybody is starting from the big picture, right? Talking about your viewpoints and values around money, thinking together through your most important goals, right? And then looking at, okay, what are our top priorities and what's our current situation? And how do we bridge the gap between the two, right?
Love that.
And as you look at that, how do we go from point A to point B? A being where we are, B meaning where we want to be. Then within that, all of a sudden you'll realize, oh, this kind of agreement makes sense, right? Maybe you're totally on track to crush your goals, and so it doesn't bother you if your partner spends, up to $500 without telling you. Or maybe things are really tight this month, or you're trying to save up money so that one of you can start a side hustle or go back to school or something like this, or leave a job that is toxic. Maybe in that case, you want to talk to each other about any expenditures over $50, right? It's all situational. It's all based on your needs, both financially, but also emotionally, right? Sometimes one partner has more anxiety around this, and maybe they've been hurt in the past and taken advantage of by other partners financially. And so to build that sense of safety and security, maybe they need to start at kind of a lower bar. Like, okay, let's talk about any purchases over $50, right? And then as they get more comfortable and the trust builds, not just in their conscious brain, but in our nervous systems, right? Then we can up that. Okay, let's try 100 now, see how that feels. Okay, let's try 200. Okay, maybe now we're going to combine our finances entirely. And, there's no one right answer. I always say it's about what resonates for each and both of you in the relationship and what's going to move your relationship and your finances forward. That's what we should be thinking about and talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna jump to an anecdote, and then we'll talk about how we get to anecdotes like this. So I had a friend who had a dad who was ostensibly going to work every day, who was ostensibly a businessman, who was keeping the family, which of a mom and a dad, and I want to say it was 5 kids, maybe it was 4.
Mm-hmm.
In a comfortable lifestyle. I mean, it wasn't like, like private jets or anything like that, but I think the kids were in boarding school and, it was, there was some money going into keeping up this family's lifestyle. Well, one day dad didn't come home from work. Turned out he had committed suicide. And in his letter, he announced for the first time that there was no job, there were no businesses. And in fact, they were quite a bit of debt. And, there was no way that he could have dealt with this in any other way. And although, this is an extreme example, I think it illustrates the profound degree of fear and shame that so many of us feel when we're uncomfortable with where our financial situation is, and how difficult it can be to talk to the people we need to talk to the most about what's going on with our finances.
Absolutely. And the sad part about that anecdote and so many others along similar lines, even if they don't get to that extreme, is just having people suffer in silence right? I like to say, the only thing worse than trying to get out of a mountain of debt is trying to do it alone without your best friend and the person who you promised your lives to each other, and hiding that from them. Like that's just going to take a hard, challenging situation and make it 100 times worse. Right. But you're right that the shame is a big part of what gets in the way. And particularly for men, we are socialized to feel like it's our job to take care of our family financially. And even if you don't believe that I use this term like your conscious brain, like even if you would write down my values are, it doesn't matter who makes the money. And as long as we're taken care of, it's okay. But in your subconscious, years and years of messaging around that can be lodged in there.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah,
it's
hard to get away from it 100%, even if we also have the conscious belief that it doesn't have to be.
Right. And, I also like to say to transcend this, it really takes, especially in a heterosexual relationship, it takes the man acknowledging that he's been fed these messages and looking into how it affects him. Yeah. And then also the woman acknowledging that she's received the other side of that coin in messaging, which is that she's supposed to financially be taken care of by her husband, right? And so seeing, are there ways in which her resentment is building if he's not the main provider or providing enough financially? Seeing, are there ways in which she is making him feel small, right? And if they both can be responsible for that, then, we can have an arrangement where any person makes whatever percentage of the money or however much money. But if we're not conscious about it, it can really easily devolve. And unfortunately, because money's such taboo, we tend to need a little bit of extra oomph and effort and even support to kind of dig ourselves out from underground with some of these narratives we've been fed.
Right. And what I would add to that is, in our society, feeling uncomfortable feelings is usually considered a sign that something's wrong, and B, something that we don't really have the tools to digest. So if we feel fear or shame, we tend to interpret that as a message that we should avoid whatever it is that we feel fear or shame around.
Right.
That's not what these feelings mean, number one. But number two, when we do that, we usually exacerbate the problem by avoiding it. And we increase the feelings of fear or shame, which makes it even harder to approach the subject, whatever it is, whether it's finances or something else.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately super common, right? And this is what a lot of my work is about, obviously with my clients doing this work, but even before people become clients, right? I end up creating a lot of content around how to start the introspection and the self-reflection around money, how to request from your partner that you can get the money conversation started, right? How to have a healthy discussion about money, even a single one, right? Because so many couples have never really had like a thorough and healthy single discussion about money, right? Because that actually takes often like a few prerequisites to make that happen. And unfortunately, many of us don't have those.
Right. So that sets up the stage for, the question that's kind of the theme of the show, in addition to all the others, is what, we talk about financial infidelity. I think, and you can tell me what you think about this, that this exists on a continuum and that there's no like one thing that counts as financial infidelity, or this clear red line that once you cross it, it's financial infidelity, and anything on the other side of the line is okay. My sense is that when we don't have a clear understanding of what our financial agreements are, there's a slippery slope. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I certainly agree that there's no strict definition of financial infidelity. It's to the extent you have agreements with your partner and you like transgress, you go against those agreements, then yes, I think you can probably pretty comfortably call that financial infidelity. But, and there's some clear cases, right? Like not telling your partner about debts that you owe or accounts that you hold, and then you get married and they don't know about these things, right? I think there's some pretty clear examples. And then there's maybe things that are a little bit more of a gray area, but even with those, they can add up over time. They can create a pattern, they can create a precedent. And the thing here is, why do people commit acts of financial infidelity? And I think it's what we were talking about before. This is an uncomfortable topic. We don't learn how to talk about it. We don't learn how to deal with our uncomfortable feelings. Money can bring up anxiety, fear, shame, embarrassment, judging ourselves like we are not good enough. We're not where we're supposed to be. We don't know enough. We're not good at it. Right. Whether that's earning money, managing money, saving money, right? It brings up all of this stuff. And like you said, because we don't necessarily have the tools to sit with those feelings and have productive conversations or work through it, then it becomes really easy to avoid. And sometimes it could be a big thing, or it could be like a one thing leads to another kind of situation. But either way, financial infidelity is like a term that we're trying to, like you said, kind of place around a certain bucket of actions. More importantly is, does this action or inaction you're taking around your finances, does it fuel connection and progress towards your shared financial goals, or does it fuel disconnection and or resentment or fear? And also, does it derail progress towards your financial goals?
Yeah.
Right. And, I'm not saying that you have to evaluate every single choice you make, like, oh, I bought the chips at Walmart, even though I could have driven to Kroger's and they would have been 10 cents cheaper, right? Like, You don't have to go that extreme, right? But just thinking about that as a guideline, like, is this furthering the goals of this relationship, which are intimacy, love, mutual achievement of goals, or is it going the other direction? Is it fueling disconnection, fear, hiding, shame, embarrassment, right? Yeah. The more it's the latter, the more you want to reevaluate. The more it's the former, then the more you stay on that track.
Yeah, for sure. And something that I see that I'm interested in your take on is, people often ask me about, well, where's the line between my autonomy, my privacy, my right to make my own choices that I like, no matter what, even if my partner doesn't necessarily approve of them, and, my obligations or duties to, my relationship. And sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. So go ahead and respond.
Okay, yeah. I think that sometimes we distort the money conversation and make it distinct from other conversations inside of our relationship, maybe because there's a tangible aspect to money, there's actual numbers involved. But, and I get that, but in some ways it can be a mistake. And here's what I mean. How do you know whether it's okay for you to have, let's assume you're married, right? How do you know whether it's okay to have a friend of, let's say, heterosexual relationship again, right? And I'll speak as a man. How do you know when it's okay to have a friend of the opposite sex? How do you know when it's okay to have a work wife or work husband? How do you know when it's okay to kiss someone else besides your spouse? How do you know when it's okay to sleep with someone besides your spouse? The way you know it is through communication, right? Through vulnerable conversation, through creating shared expectations and norms and values that govern your commitment to each other in your relationship, right? And it's the same way around money. I think sometimes people, like I said, they make money out to be some like almost foreign object. And so as if it affects these conversations and that they're completely distinct. But no, I think there's a ton of commonality here, right? And so it's about you sharing with your partner, maybe mistakes you've made in the relationship or in the past, if you have, dealing with those, right? And then working, what does it look like to restore trust, right? And again, maybe today that looks like all of our accounts are joint. Maybe after a year or two and we feel safe again and trusting, then we can start having some separate accounts, right? Maybe we still see the balance each other has in our separate accounts to make sure nobody's going like off the deep end with their spending, but maybe I don't have to see every spending choice you're making in that account, right? And again, it's about what's going to move that relationship forward. And the way you figure out what is financial infidelity, again, it's like, is it hurting the relationship? And it's a good clue that if it's beyond something if it's not what you talked about, if it's something that's like less responsible than what you talked about, or you're sharing less than what you just agreed that you would share, then it's probably harming the relationship, right? So in a way, I think that's both kind of clear and messy, but like a lot of the work I do, my intention is to ask you the right questions so that you can explore for yourself what the right choice is, where to put this money, what expenses to cut, what expenses to increase, what consists of what's the number where, okay, above this amount, we should talk to each other, or maybe we don't have that at all. It's about, I see my role as helping you ask yourselves the right questions and gleaning the insights into what matters to you so that you and your partner can come to an agreement.
Yeah, I love that. And I totally agree. I don't think there's any sort of, even though we talk about financial infidelity as if it is a thing, I think it's elusive and hard to pin down. And what I see more often than not is that people have never had conversations about, what's okay and not okay in the relationship, whether it pertains to any sort of behavior, whether it, contact with another person that could be of romantic interest, or whether it's about spending, or whether it's about other practices that are important to the integrity of the relationship. We make a lot of assumptions that we're on the same page with our partner sometimes. And that can be because we, seem to have a lot of shared values and shared perspectives on how to do things, or we just want to think that we have shared perspectives on how to do things. And it can be hard to have these conversations.
Absolutely. They can be uncomfortable. And a big thing is that people fear that if they have these conversations, they might realize that they're not aligned with their partner.
Right.
And I get that. And look, I acknowledge that this is a possibility, right? When you do talk about these things, you might realize the alignment you thought was there or hoped was there may not be there. Yeah. But I'll say two things. Number one, be careful to assume too much too quickly. A lot of times what from one point of view may look like we're not seeing things the same way.
Right.
That may not actually be the truth, right? Like I always say, for example, I'm pretty sure both you and your partner want to live your best lives, right? So there's, at that level at least, there is agreement. You feel the same way. Now, as we drill down, does it deviate at certain points? Of course, at some point it does, right? But it's not that you have completely different. You do share at least certain points of view. You want to live good lives, right? If you maybe have kids, you want to make sure your kids have a good life. You hopefully want each other to be happy. So there are points of agreement. And then actually having these conversations, the thing is that if you don't have these conversations, I'm a big Star Wars fan, like it's the path to the dark side, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes fear and anger are the path to the dark side, right? And in this case, the dark side is a lack of intimacy, maybe breaking up, fighting, arguing, torpedoing your own finances, destroying your intimacy. So it's actually, even though the conversations might at times be uncomfortable or lead to an argument, without them, you're really in trouble. And with them, you actually have a chance to do something constructive together, create a shared vision that honors each of you individually as well as your goals collectively. And that's really the work of relationship, right? That's what that interdependence looks like. It's not codependence that we're completely reliant on each other and inseparable. It's not complete independence, as in we are just living parallel lives. No, it's this kind of amorphous but like beautiful spiritual interlocking that sits somewhere in the middle, right? That we liked, that the word I've heard for it is interdependence, right? How are we interdependent on each other, even though there might be pockets of like, I am free to do this kind of thing or make this kind of choice on my own, right? How do we get to that place of deeper interdependence? And I'll tell you this, avoiding these conversations is not going to get you there, right? Actually having them and getting the support you need to have those conversations, right? Whether it's with a coach or a therapist or by listening to a podcast or reading a book, right? There's not too many podcasts or books about this topic out there, but there are a few, including my own podcast, book hopefully in the future. But there's no shame because, again, this is one of the top causes of divorce. No shame in that it is a challenging issue for you and your significant other. In fact, that makes you normal. If it wasn't challenging, you'd be the weird ones, right? Those are the less common couples. And God bless them, like A+, keep going. Don't fix what isn't broken. But for most of us, this is a challenging topic.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great point. Like normalizing the fact that many aspects of relationships are difficult and that's okay is such an important point to me. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned, which I think, this ties on to what you mentioned, is my belief is that our romantic relationships can be our greatest spiritual teachers if we let them. And one of the reasons for that is that if we engage in the difficulties in our relationships, we start to learn that things can be okay in a different way than we originally conceived that they had to be in order for us to be okay.
I don't really have much to add to that. I agree that relationships can be our most powerful spiritual teacher in a lot of cases. And they definitely call attention to the parts of ourselves that are there to work on.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, by the way, always in conflict, right?
Right.
Like my girlfriend and I each of us has some relative strengths, right? And so her strengths call attention to, for me in my life, where I am not embodying those things, right? Like she's naturally better at enjoying things for herself and spending money on having nice things for herself and taking care of those needs. And my default is more to be really on the stingy end of things, right? So it's shown a light on that. And again, not all these conversations have to be uncomfortable or ugly. I just realized through absorbing her energy and the power of her example, shoot, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to get that TV and reorganize my room because it's going to be a much more livable space. Right. And you know what? It is. And I'm happy I did it, right? I still did it. My
life is better.
Yeah, and I still did it my way, right? I searched for a good deal and I made sure everything was really well thought out and planned, but nevertheless, it's a good back and forth give and take, right? And like you said, if we let ourselves be open, if we can park our ego at the curb, right, and open the door and see what's behind it. And that takes courage. And like you said before about the responsibility thing, it doesn't take courage one day. It takes courage many days, over and over and over again, if we're to continue cultivating the kind of intimacy that most of us, I certainly want in a relationship. And I think most of us do as well.
Right, for sure. So good. All right, Adam, one last question for you. As you know, this show is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity of various different types. Can you tell us about a time when you've been unfaithful to someone, maybe yourself, maybe another person or something?
Yeah, for sure. It's a powerful question. And what came to mind for me was a period in my life where I was extremely overextended. And so how this looked was, about 45 hours a week, working at a nonprofit, working on housing and homelessness related issues. This was when I was still practicing law, or working as a lawyer, I should say. And that was taxing, plus an hour commute to and from work. And then on top of that, doing about 20 hours a week of volunteer coaching and another 15 to 20 hours a week of volunteer advocacy, much of which was spent doing conflict resolution work for a global organization I was a part of. And so in sum, I was often working 80 to 85 hours a week on heavily emotional issues, plus a significant commute. And so I was sleeping less than 6 hours every night. I was not exercising. My diet really fluctuated. I had no wellness practice. And I wasn't seeing a coach or a therapist. I wasn't doing any meditation. And I just got severely, severely burnt out. Right?
I can imagine. I'm burnt out just listening to you.
Yeah. And that's what it was like. Right. Yeah. And I remember I had one friend who I told her my schedule and she goes, "Oh my God, I'm exhausted just listening to you." Right. Yeah. And as crappy as that moment in time was, let me say that again. I don't like to use the word. As challenging as that moment in time was, thankfully, I was also able to help turn that into the life I lead now, where I started taking my wellness and my well-being into my own hands. I started letting go of some of my volunteer commitments. I started thinking about a job that suited me and would be fulfilling, and ended up creating this business. I started a meditation practice. I started seeing professionals who could help me navigate the different stressors and challenges in my life, right? I moved forward all those things, and it was just an absolutely essential part of being where I am today as a couples financial coach, getting to do something I love and making a huge contribution in the lives of couples and families.
I love that. for so many reasons. But one of the things that I really love about that is, often when I work with folks who are actively cheating on their partners, the moment in their life seems like a huge crisis that has the potential to blow up their lives and be completely negative. And the thing is, being out of integrity with ourselves in some way, or out of alignment with our values, or in a moment of conflict within ourselves, can be such a productive moment in our life, because it's the gateway to change. It's the gateway to revising things that need to be adjusted. And sometimes, it takes a little nudge to make big changes in our lives, but sometimes it takes a really big nudge to make in our lives.
Yeah,
Those nudges come in
absolutely.
various forms. Yeah.
They certainly do.
Yeah. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being here with me today. Tell everyone what your podcast is called so they can find it.
Sure. My podcast is called the Equal Partners Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, Apple, all the major things, and it's all about relationships and money.
Love it. And remind everyone how they can find you on the interwebs.
Absolutely. So first, I have a gift to offer, which is I have a wonderful quiz that will tell you your couple's money personality type. And so that's a super quick quiz, but you can find it either you can find the quiz at, I have one of these bit.ly links. So it's bit.ly/love money quiz. And then the first letter of each word is capitalized. So it's bit.ly/love with a capital L, money with a capital M, quiz with a capital Q. Or if you go to my website, adamkol.com, and then you click in the navigation menu quiz, it'll take you there. So you'll get to see your result. You'll get to see some analysis of some of the ways you might be feeling, the challenges you might be facing. And then I give you a free tool to help you elevate your conversations about money with your partner. And then as far as social media, my main platform is LinkedIn, where you can find me as Adam Kol, or Instagram at Adam Kol Coaching.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. Thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we'd love it if you'd head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.